Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves in the quiet glow of an alchemist's midnight laboratory, where glass vessels shimmer like captured starlight and the world outside has long since fallen asleep. Let us begin by stepping gently through the narrow, ivy-framed doorway, careful not to disturb the small brass bell that hangs overhead. Though even if it did chime, it would only do so in the softest, most considerate tone, as though it too respects the hour. Inside, the air is warm and faintly sweet, carrying the scent of dried lavender, orange peel, and something more difficult to place. Something mineral and quietly electric, like rain just before it arrives. The laboratory is not large, but it feels full in a comforting way, like a well-loved kitchen where every surface has a purpose and every object a story. To your left, a long wooden workbench stretches beneath a row of rounded windows. The glass panes are slightly fogged from the warmth within, blurring the night outside into soft shapes of indigo and silver. Occasionally, a moth taps gently against the glass, as if politely asking to be let in, though it seems content enough to linger there, basking in the glow. The workbench itself is a careful sort of chaos. Rows of glass vials, some no bigger than a fingertip, others tall and slender, stand clustered together like a small, transparent city. Each contains something different, a swirl of pale blue liquid that moves as though thinking, a fine golden dust that settles and lifts, as if breathing a dark, syrupy substance that reflects light in slow, deliberate ripples. A low flame burns beneath a copper still at the center of the bench, its heat steady and patient. The liquid inside bubbles with a soft, rhythmic plip, plip, plip. The sound so even and predictable that it feels almost like a heartbeat. Every now and then, a thin ribbon of steam curls upward, catching the light and briefly forming shapes that look almost intentional. Though if you stare too long, they dissolve into nothing more than mist. Somewhere deeper in the room, a clock ticks. Not loudly, not insistently, just a gentle, unobtrusive marking of time, as though it understands that here, time is more of a companion than a ruler. The alchemist is here, of course. You might not notice them at first. They move quietly, with the kind of practiced ease that comes from years of doing the same careful work night after night. Their robes are simple and well worn, sleeves rolled just slightly at the cuffs, revealing hands that are steady and precise, though faintly stained with traces of past experiments. Soft blues, muted greens, the occasional stubborn shimmer of silver. They pause at the workbench, leaning in just enough to inspect the copper still, with a small adjustment, a turn of a knob no larger than a coin. The flame shifts, and the bubbling responds immediately, settling into an even gentler rhythm. Much better. They murmur, though whether to the apparatus or to themselves is unclear. You may notice, as you settle into the space, that the laboratory hums. Not loudly, and not from any single source, but as a collective whisper of many small enchantments working in harmony. A shelf of crystals along the far wall emits a faint, steady vibration, like the quietest note of a distant bell. A hanging mobile of glass spheres turns slowly in the air, though there is no breeze to guide it, each sphere chiming ever so softly as it passes the others. It is the sort of place where nothing ever truly feels still, and yet nothing ever feels rushed. The alchemist reaches for a small ceramic jar labeled in looping, careful script. The label has faded slightly over time, but you can still make out the words ground moon root. When the lid is lifted, a subtle glow spills out, not bright but gentle, like the memory of light rather than the thing itself. With a slender spoon, They measure out exactly 3 scoops, leveling each one with the edge of the jar. There is a quiet satisfaction in the precision of it, in the way each motion is deliberate and unhurried. The powder is added to a waiting glass bowl, where it settles into a soft, luminous mound. When the alchemist taps the side of the bowl, the powder responds with a faint shimmer, as though acknowledging the contact. Still lively, they note, with a hint of approval. Next comes a small vial of liquid the color of early morning fog, somewhere between silver and blue. When uncorked, it releases a faint, cool scent like stone after rain. The alchemist pours just a thin stream into the bowl, and immediately the mixture begins to react. Not dramatically. This is not that sort of laboratory. Instead, the surface of the powder gently collapses inward, forming delicate, shifting patterns like frost creeping across a window pane. The glow deepens slightly, becoming more focused, more settled. The alchemist watches closely, hands resting lightly on the edge of the bench. There is no tension in their posture, no urgency, only attention. After a moment, they nod, satisfied, and reach for a slender glass rod. With slow, circular motions, they begin to stir. The sound is soft, a faint, crystalline whisper as glass meets glass. Stir, pause, stir again. The rhythm is unhurried, almost meditative. As the mixture blends, its texture changes, becoming smoother, more cohesive, until it resembles something like a thick, luminous cream. Across the room, a kettle begins to hum. It sits atop a small iron stove in the corner, its surface etched with tiny symbols that glow faintly in the low light. The hum builds gradually, not into a whistle, but into a gentle, resonant tone that seems to fill the space without overwhelming it. The alchemist glances over, then returns their attention to the bowl for just a few more careful turns of the rod. "There we are," they say softly. They set the rod aside and lift the bowl, carrying it across the room with steady hands. As they move, the light from the mixture casts shifting patterns along the walls. Soft, flowing shapes that drift over shelves and instruments, briefly illuminating them before passing on. At the stove, they pour the contents of the bowl into a waiting teapot, one made of thick, cloudy glass that diffuses the glow into something even softer. The kettle's hum deepens slightly as the two meet, as though greeting one another. A lid is placed gently on top. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, slowly, the teapot begins to glow from within, the light pulsing faintly in time with that steady, unseen rhythm that seems to live at the heart of the laboratory. The alchemist rests a hand on the side of the pot, not to check its heat, but almost as if to reassure it. "Take your time," they murmur, and here in this quiet corner of the world, time seems more than willing to listen. The glow from the teapot settles into a slow, steady pulse, like a sleeping creature's breath, and the alchemist lingers beside it for a moment longer, their hand resting lightly against the warm glass. They do not rush to the next task. Instead, they turn their attention to a small stack of cups arranged neatly on a nearby shelf. Each one is slightly different, some tall and narrow, others round and shallow, a few with delicate handles shaped like curling vines. None match, and yet together they feel like a quiet, harmonious collection gathered over many unhurried years. The alchemist selects one after a brief pause. It is a simple cup, pale and matte, with a faint ring of glaze around the rim that catches the light just enough to shimmer. There is a small chip at its base, barely noticeable, though it seems to give the cup a certain personality, as though it has been dropped once, forgiven, and welcomed back into use without ceremony. A reliable one, They say softly, as if the cup might appreciate the acknowledgement. They set it on the workbench and return to the teapot, where the glow has deepened into a gentle, honeyed gold. Lifting the lid releases a quiet sigh of steam that curls upward in thin, elegant threads. The scent that follows is subtle but comforting. Warm herbs, a hint of citrus, and that same faintly electric note, now softened into something more rounded and calm. Carefully, the alchemist pours. The liquid flows in a smooth, unbroken stream, catching the dim light as it falls. It fills the cup slowly, the surface rippling once, twice, before settling into stillness. For a moment, the glow within the tea lingers, then fades just slightly, as though it has tucked itself in, content to rest. The alchemist sets the teapot aside and wraps both hands around the cup, holding it close. Not to drink just yet, but simply to feel its warmth. Their shoulders drop a fraction, the smallest release of tension, as though this simple act completes something important. Across the room, a set of narrow drawers gives a soft, almost polite creak. The alchemist glances over, one eyebrow lifting just slightly.
Yes, yes,
they murmur. I haven't forgotten. They carry the cup with them as they cross the room, moving toward a tall cabinet filled with dozens, perhaps hundreds, of tiny labeled compartments. Each drawer is marked with the same careful script seen on the jars and bottles, though here the labels are even more specific. Dried star petal late bloom, powdered riverstone feinig, ash of birch. Third burning, the drawer that opened on its own sits just slightly ajar, as if waiting. The alchemist nudges it the rest of the way open with a gentle push of their finger. Inside is a collection of small, neatly bundled stems tied with thin silver thread. Each bundle gives off the faintest glow, barely visible unless you know to look for it. They say, nodding. You're right on time. They set the cup down on a nearby ledge and carefully lift one of the bundles. As soon as it leaves the drawer, the glow strengthens just a touch, responding to the open air. The scent is immediate and grounding, green and fresh, with a subtle sweetness beneath it, like leaves warmed by the last light of day. These will need sorting. The alchemist notes more to the room than to anyone in particular. They carry the bundle back to the workbench and retrieve a small pair of shears. The blades are thin and precise, their edges catching the light in brief, quiet flashes. With practiced care, the alchemist begins to trim the stems, separating them into even lengths. Snip, pause, snip. Each cut is deliberate, measured. The trimmed pieces are placed into a shallow, wooden tray lined with soft cloth, where they settle into neat, parallel rows. As the work continues, the laboratory seems to lean into the rhythm. The clock's ticking becomes a touch more noticeable, though still gentle. The crystals along the wall maintain their steady hum, a low, constant note that underpins everything else. Even the faint tapping of the moth at the window seems to fall into time, as though it too has decided to participate. The alchemist occasionally pauses to take a small sip from the cup. Each time, they close their eyes for just a second, as if listening inwardly to the effect of the tea. Balanced. They say once with quiet approval. At another sip, they tilt their heads slightly, perhaps a touch more moonroot next time. There is no frustration in the observation, only curiosity, a gentle adjustment for the future. Once the stems are trimmed, the alchemist gathers them into small bundles once more, this time securing them with a different thread. This one a soft, muted blue. When tied, the bundles seem to settle, their faint glow becoming more even, more contained. These will rest well, they say, placing the finished bundles into a shallow wicker basket. The basket itself gives a quiet, contented creak, as though pleased with its new occupants. For a moment, the alchemist simply stands there, hands resting lightly on the edge of the workbench, taking in the room. It is not silent. There is the ever-present hum, the soft ticking, the occasional whisper of settling wood or shifting glass. But none of it asks anything. None of it demands attention. It is a kind of quiet that allows thoughts to drift without catching on anything sharp. The alchemist exhales slowly, a breath that seems to match the rhythm of the glowing teapot behind them. Then, almost as an afterthought, they turn toward a narrow spiral staircase tucked into the far corner of the room. It winds upward into shadow, its steps worn smooth from long use. At the base of the staircase sits a small, round table. On it rests a single object, a glass sphere no larger than a plum, filled with what appears to be a slow, moving constellation of tiny lights. As the alchemist approaches, the lights within the sphere shift, gathering toward the side closest to them, as though drawn by their presence. Yes, they say softly, reaching out to steady it with their fingertips. I think it's nearly time. The sphere responds with a faint, almost inaudible chime, and the lights inside rearrange themselves into a gentle spiral, turning lazily in place. The alchemist watches for a moment, their expression calm and thoughtful. Not quite yet. They decide with a small nod. A little longer. They lift the sphere just enough to rotate it slightly on the table, adjusting its position so that the lights settle into a slower pattern, their movement easing into something even more tranquil. Satisfied, they return to the workbench once more, where the cup of tea waits, still warm, still faintly glowing at its core. They pick it up again, holding it with both hands, and this time they take a longer sip. Outside, beyond the softly fogged windows, the night continues its quiet unfolding. The moth has settled now, wings still against the glass. The stars remain steady, distant but present, like patient witnesses. And within the laboratory, everything continues just as it should. Each small task completed, each gentle process allowed its time, each subtle piece of magic woven carefully into the fabric of the night. The tea has cooled just enough to be held comfortably now, its warmth steady rather than bright, and the alchemist lingers with it for a quiet moment, longer before setting the cup down beside a small, well-worn notebook. The notebook's cover is soft from years of handling, its edges rounded, its spine gently creased. When open, it reveals pages filled with neat, looping handwriting, observations, adjustments, small reflections written in ink that has faded slightly with time. The alchemist flips to a fresh page. For a moment, they simply hold the pen above the paper, listening to the room, to the lingering rhythm of the evening's work, to the faint, almost imperceptible echo of the tea still settling within them. Then, slowly, they begin to write. Midnight infusion. They murmur softly as the pen moves. Stable, gentle luminescence. Settles the mind without dimming it. The nib scratches lightly against the paper, a quiet, grounding sound. Consider increasing moonroot by a small margin, though perhaps only on colder nights. They pause, glancing toward the window, as if to confirm the temperature of the darkness outside, then nod once, satisfied with the thought. A final note is added, short, almost an afterthought, best taken slowly. The pen is set aside. The alchemist closes the notebook with a soft, familiar thump and rests their palm on the cover for just a second, as though sealing the entry in place. Across the room, the copper still has quieted, its bubbling now reduced to an occasional, lazy blip. The flame beneath it flickers gently, lower than before, content to maintain a soft, residual warmth rather than an active boil. The alchemist crosses back to it and, with a careful turn of that same small knob, lowers the flame even further until it becomes little more than a glowing ember. Rest now, they say, not unkindly. The still responds with a faint settling sound, a tiny shift of metal and glass, as though easing itself into stillness. One by one, the alchemist begins the slow process of closing the laboratory for the night. Not shutting it down, never that. Just softening it. A series of hanging lanterns are dimmed with gentle twists, their light lowering from a warm glow to something even more subdued, like candlelight seen through closed eyelids. The crystals along the wall are brushed lightly with the alchemist's fingertips, and their hum drops to an even quieter register, barely more than a suggestion of sound. The glass spheres of the mobile slow their turning, their soft chimes spacing farther apart until they become occasional, delicate notes drifting through the air. Even the clock seems to adjust, its ticking stretching slightly, as though time itself is relaxing into the later hour. At the workbench, the alchemist tidies with unhurried care. The glass rod is wiped clean and set precisely in its place. The empty bowl is rinsed with a small measure of clear liquid from a stoppered bottle. No water here, but something that leaves the glass not just clean, but faintly luminous for a moment before it fades. Each jar is returned to its proper spot, labels facing forward, their contents settling as they are placed back among their neighbors. The small ceramic jar of ground moonroot is given a final, gentle tap after its lid is secured. Sleep well, the alchemist murmurs to it, with the quiet humor of someone who has spent a great deal of time in the company of things that may or may not listen. The wicker basket of trimmed bundles is carried to a shelf near the staircase, where it is set among others prepared on previous nights. Together, they form a soft patchwork of muted glows, greens, blues, and faint silvers, each one steady, each one at rest. Finally, the alchemist returns to the small table at the base of the spiral stairs. The glass sphere is still there, its tiny constellation now moving in an even slower, more languid spiral. The lights within it pulse faintly, like distant fireflies drifting through a summer night. The alchemist places their hand beside it, not touching this time, just near enough. Yes, they say quietly. Now it's time. With a careful motion, they lift the sphere from the table. It is held gently, but securely, as though it carries not weight, but importance. They begin to ascend the spiral staircase. Each step is soft underfoot, the worn wood making only the faintest sound. As they climb, the laboratory below seems to settle even further, its lights dimming just a touch more, its sounds softening into a distant, comforting presence. Upstairs, the space opens into a small, quieter room. Here, the air is cooler, the scents lighter. Linen, a trace of dried herbs, and the faint, clean note of night air slipping in through a slightly open window. A simple bed rests against one wall, its blankets layered in soft, muted tones. Beside it, a small bedside table waits. The alchemist sets the glass sphere there, adjusting it just slightly until it sits perfectly centered. As soon as it is placed, the lights within respond, spreading out into a gentle, even pattern, no longer spiraling, but drifting slowly, like a sky full of patient stars. The room fills with a soft ambient glow, not bright enough to wake, not dim enough to disappear, just enough to exist. The alchemist takes a final sip from the cup they have carried with them, now only faintly warm, and sets it beside the sphere. They sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, hands resting loosely in their lap, gaze drifting between the quiet constellation on the table and the darkened window beyond. Outside, the night has deepened. The stars are clearer now, their light steady and distant. The world feels still in that particular way it only does in the deepest hours, when even the wind seems to move more carefully so as not to disturb anything at rest. The alchemist exhales softly. Then, with unhurried ease, they lie back, drawing the blankets over themselves. The fabric settles with a faint whisper, warm and familiar. For a moment, their eyes remain open, watching the slow drift of light within the glass sphere. One breath passes, then another. The lights continue their quiet motion, steady and unchanging, a soft rhythm to follow without needing to think about it. Downstairs, the laboratory hums on in its gentlest form, crystals resting, embers glowing, glass cooling in the quiet. Nothing has been left undone. Nothing is waiting. Everything is exactly as it should be. And as the alchemist's eyes finally close, the last small movements of the night seem to settle with them, the entire space easing into a shared stillness, soft and untroubled, carrying you gently with it into rest. Tonight, we find ourselves beneath the softly slanted roof of an old wizard's library as rain taps patiently against the tall, wavy windows. Let us begin by stepping in from the narrow cobblestone lane, where puddles have gathered like small, thoughtful mirrors, reflecting the lantern light in quiet gold. The wooden door of the library is slightly swollen from the damp, and it opens with a gentle, familiar creak, as though it recognizes you and is taking a slow breath in greeting. Inside, the air is immediately warmer, wrapped in the comforting sense of aged parchment, steeping tea, and a faint trace of cedar smoke curling from a low, burning hearth. You pause just long enough to shake the rain from your cloak. Droplets fall softly onto the entry rail, which obligingly absorbs them with a faint, polite sigh, enchanted, no doubt, to keep the floors dry without complaint. Somewhere deeper within the library, a clock ticks with unhurried certainty, its rhythm steady and grounding, like a quiet companion who asks nothing of you but your presence. The light here is low but golden. It spills from hovering orbs that drift lazily near the ceiling beams, each one glowing with a warmth that feels less like illumination and more like memory. Bookshelves rise high along the walls, bending slightly with age, packed with volumes of all sizes, some neatly aligned, others reclining at relaxed angles as though they've grown comfortable over the years. A soft shuffling sound greets you as you step further inside. It is not footsteps exactly, but rather the subtle repositioning of books themselves. One particularly thick tome near the end of a shelf nudges itself upright, clearing its throat, an unnecessary but endearing gesture, and settles as if to make space for you. The wizard who keeps this library is not immediately visible, which is not unusual. In fact, it would be more surprising if he were standing plainly in sight. He has a habit of appearing gradually, like steam from a kettle or a thought that arrives just after you've stopped looking for it. You make your way toward the hearth, drawn by the quiet crackle of firewood. The flames are low and steady, their colors shifting subtly, mostly amber and soft gold. But occasionally a thread of lavender flickers through, as if the fire is remembering a different kind of wood. A kettle hangs just above the heat, not quite touching the flames, gently rocking back and forth on a hook that seems to move of its own accord. As you settle into a deep, worn armchair, the cushions adjust themselves beneath you, finding the exact shape that feels most at ease. The fabric is soft, slightly textured, and pleasantly warm, as though someone had been sitting there just moments ago, even if no one has. The rain continues its steady rhythm against the windows. Not a harsh downpour, but a consistent, thoughtful kind of rain. The kind that encourages stillness, that invites you to stay a while. From somewhere behind a tall stack of books, a voice hums softly. It is tuneless in the most comforting way, drifting in and out of melody without any urgency to resolve. A moment later, the wizard emerges, not with any dramatic flourish, but simply by being there where he previously was not. He is older, though not in a way that suggests frailty. His robes are layered and practical, each pocket slightly bulging with something that hums, clicks, or occasionally wiggles. His beard is long but neatly gathered into a loose braid, tied with a ribbon that looks suspiciously like it might have once belonged to a curtain. "Aye," he says, as though your arrival had been noted long before you stepped through the door. "You've come on a good evening." The rain has decided to be particularly considerate. He moves toward the kettle with an easy familiarity, adjusting it by a fraction of an inch. The motion causes the steam to curl upward in a more deliberate spiral, forming faint shapes that almost resemble letters, though they never quite settle into anything readable. "Tea," he offers, already reaching for a pair of cups that seem to have quietly placed themselves on a nearby table. The cups are mismatched, but in a way that feels intentional. One is a soft, cloudy blue with a handle that curves like a question mark. The other is a warm, speckled cream, its rim slightly uneven as though shaped by hand. He pours the tea slowly, and the sound is gentle, steady, a small, grounding presence beneath the rhythm of the rain. You take the cup he offers, noticing the subtle warmth spreading into your hands. The tea smells faintly of chamomile, but there is something else beneath it, something difficult to name. Perhaps a hint of lavender, or a whisper of something older, like dried pages or distant summer air. Around you, the library continues its quiet life. A ladder along one of the shelves slides a few inches to the left, as though adjusting its posture. A stack of scrolls near the far wall tightens itself with a soft rustle, securing a ribbon that had begun to loosen. None of it feels hurried. Nothing here ever does. The wizard settles into a chair across from you, though settles might not be the right word. The chair seems to rise slightly to meet him, accommodating his shape before he's fully seated. He takes a slow sip of his tea, closing his eyes briefly, not in fatigue, but in appreciation. There's a particular kind of reading that suits a rainy evening, he says after a moment. Not the sort that demands attention, but the sort that keeps you company. He gestures vaguely toward the shelves, and one of the books responds by sliding out just enough to catch your eye. Its cover is worn, the title faded, though you can just make out a few looping letters that seem to rearrange themselves when you're not looking directly at them. It won't insist on being finished. The wizard adds with a small, knowing smile. Those are the best kind, I think. The fire shifts gently, a log settling deeper into the embers. The lavender flicker returns briefly, casting a soft, unusual glow across the room. Outside, the rain continues, tapping its quiet rhythm against the glass. Steady, patient, and entirely unconcerned with time. You take another sip of tea, feeling the warmth settle more deeply now. Not just in your hands, but somewhere quieter, somewhere slower. The library seems to notice this, responding in small, almost imperceptible ways, the lights dimming by a fraction, the sounds softening just slightly, as though everything is leaning into the same gentle stillness. And here, in this softly breathing space of books and rain and quiet magic, the evening begins to unfold, not with urgency, but with the simple, steady promise of calm. The wizard watches the fire for a moment longer, as though it has just told him something mildly interesting, then sets his cup aside with a soft, deliberate tap. "Come," he says, not as a command, but as an invitation that already assumes your answer. There are a few corners of the library that only really make sense in the rain. You rise from the armchair, and it releases you with a faint, contented sigh, as though pleased to have been of service. The warmth lingers for a moment at your back before gently fading, replaced by the cozy coolness of the wider room. The floorboards beneath your feet are smooth with age, each step producing a soft, reassuring creak that seems less like noise and more like acknowledgement. The wizard moves slowly, not out of necessity, but preference. His path winds between tall shelves and narrow aisles that feel almost like quiet corridors. As you follow, the orbs of light drift subtly along, keeping pace without drawing attention to themselves. Their glow deepens just slightly, as though the library is dimming everything unnecessary to better highlight the path ahead. The rain grows more present here, not louder, exactly, but closer. You begin to notice the way it patterns itself differently against each window. Some panes receive a soft, even tapping, while others host a more wandering rhythm, as though the raindrops are exploring the glass in no particular hurry. The wizard pauses beside a long table scattered with loose pages. Each sheet is covered in careful handwriting, diagrams, and small, annotated sketches, none of them quite complete. As you draw nearer, one of the pages lifts at the corner, then settles again, as though it had briefly considered turning itself. "Unfinished thoughts," the wizard explains, brushing a hand lightly across the table. The pages respond with a faint rustle, leaning subtly into the motion. They tend to gather on evenings like this. You glance closer. One page shows a diagram of a teapot with far more internal complexity than any teapot should reasonably possess. Tiny spirals and channels labeled with words that drift in and out of legibility. Another page contains what appears to be a list, though each item gently rearranges itself when you try to read it in sequence. They're not meant to be solved, he adds with a small shrug. Just kept company. He moves on, and you follow, leaving the murmuring table behind. The shelves here grow taller, their upper reaches disappearing into shadow, though the orbs occasionally drift upward to illuminate a title or a spine as if in passing curiosity. Some of the books hum faintly, a low, steady vibration you can feel more than hear. Others remain completely still, their silence just as present. You pass a narrow alcove where a small stool sits beneath a window. A single book rests open on its seat, its pages unmoving despite the faint draft that slips through the glass. As you approach, the scent of rain is stronger. Cool, clean, with that faint mineral edge that always seems to accompany stone streets and old buildings. The wizard notices your pause and glances toward the window. "Aye," he says softly. That one prefers the sound of rain to the act of being read. The book does not react, though you have the distinct impression that it is listening very carefully to the steady tapping outside. You continue deeper still until the shelves begin to curve, not sharply, but enough that the space feels less like a room and more like the inside of something gently spiraling inward. The air here is warmer again and carries a different scent, something like dried herbs. Yes, but also a faint trace of ink and something sweet, almost like honey warmed just enough to release its fragrance. At the center of this curved space stands a narrow pedestal, and upon it rests a glass jar. Inside, something glows, not brightly, but with a soft, pulsing light like a slow heartbeat. The wizard approaches it with quiet familiarity. "This," he says, "is where the library keeps its quieter moments." He doesn't touch the jar, only stands beside it, hands folded loosely behind his back. The glow within shifts slightly, and as it does, you begin to notice faint impressions, like reflections that aren't quite visual. The feeling of turning a page, the sound of a distant kettle, the gentle weight of a blanket being adjusted. They collect over time, he continues. Moments that are too small to be remembered clearly, but too gentle to be lost. The light pulses again, and for a brief instant, you feel something like the memory of sitting exactly where you are now. Though you know you haven't been here before, it's not disorienting. If anything, it's comforting. Familiar in a way that doesn't ask questions. The wizard nods, as though that makes perfect sense. Rain helps, he adds. It gives them something to settle into. You stand there for a while, neither speaking. The jar continues its soft, steady rhythm, and the rain beyond the shelves keeps its patient tempo. Somewhere behind you, a book slides gently back into place with a muted thump, as though concluding a quiet thought. Eventually, the wizard turns, his robe whispering softly as it shifts. "There's one more place," he says. "Not far." You follow him out of the curved space, back through the winding aisles. The library seems slightly dimmer now, though not in a way that suggests fading, more like it's settling, easing into the deeper part of the evening. The orbs drift lower, their light warmer, more intimate. As you walk, you notice a subtle change in the floor beneath your feet. The wood gives way to something smoother, cooler stone, worn to a gentle polish. The sound of your steps softens further, nearly disappearing altogether. Ahead, a narrow staircase reveals itself between two shelves that quietly part to make room. The steps curve upward, lit by a series of small, embedded lights that glow like distant stars. The wizard places a hand lightly on the railing, though he doesn't seem to need it. "This part of the library," he says, glancing back at you with a hint of quiet amusement, "tends to rearrange itself when no one is paying attention. It's quite considerate about it, really. Never does so while you're on the stairs." That seems like a thoughtful policy. You begin to climb. Each step is shallow and even, inviting a slow, unhurried pace. The air grows cooler as you ascend, and the scent of rain returns, clearer now, as though the windows above are slightly open, or perhaps simply more willing to share the outside air. Halfway up, you pause, noticing how the sounds below have softened into a distant hush. The fire's crackle is now only a faint suggestion, the shifting of books reduced to the quietest murmur. What remains most present is the rain, steady, patient, and endlessly consistent. The wizard continues to the top, then steps aside to let you join him. The upper room is smaller, with a gently sloped ceiling that follows the line of the roof. Several tall windows stretch along one wall, their glass rippled and imperfect, turning the outside world into a softly shifting watercolor of light and motion. The rain traces winding paths down each pane, occasionally catching the glow from within and turning briefly to gold. A long, low bench runs beneath the windows, layered with cushions and folded blankets. A small table sits nearby, holding a single lantern whose flame burns with a steady, quiet glow. The wizard gestures toward the bench. For listening, he says, simply. You sit, and the cushions adjust with the same quiet attentiveness as the chair below. A blanket at your side shifts slightly, then settles against your arm, as though offering itself without insistence. The wizard takes a seat at the far end, leaving a comfortable space between you. He does not speak again, and after a moment, it becomes clear that he doesn't need to. The room itself seems to take over. The rain against the windows is clearer here, each drop tracing its own path, sometimes merging, sometimes parting, always moving downward in unhurried lines. The lantern's flame flickers gently, its light steady enough to rest your eyes on without effort. From somewhere within the walls, there is a faint, rhythmic hum, not mechanical, not quite magical, but something in between. It blends seamlessly with the rain, with the quiet breath of the building, with the soft, nearly imperceptible shifting of wood and stone as the night settles more fully around you. Time, here, feels less like something that passes and more like something that gently expands. And as you sit in that small, quiet room beneath the sloping roof, listening to the rain write its endless, patient story across the glass, the library seems to draw just a little closer around you, holding the evening in place, exactly as it is. For a while, nothing changes, and that, you begin to realize, is very much the point. The rain continues its steady conversation with the windows, each drop arriving with quiet certainty, lingering just long enough to be noticed before slipping away. The lantern flame holds its shape, occasionally narrowing, then blooming again, as though breathing in time with the room itself. Even the wizard remains still, his presence soft and unintrusive, like a bookmark resting patiently between pages. At some point, though it is difficult to say exactly when, you notice a subtle shift in the air. Not a sound, not quite a movement, but a gentle settling, the kind that happens when a place has decided it is comfortable. The wizard lifts one hand, not to gesture, but simply to rest it lightly on the bench between you. His fingers tap once, softly, and somewhere below, far beneath the layers of shelves and winding aisles, a faint chime answers. It is distant, rounded, and warm, a sound that doesn't echo so much as it unfolds. The library, he says quietly, likes to mark the deeper hours. You listen. After the chime fades, the rain seems to soften, not in volume, but in texture. The drops are finer now, closer together, forming a continuous hush rather than a pattern of individual taps. It wraps around the room like a gentle curtain. The wizard leans back slightly, the wood of the bench accommodating him with a faint, almost inaudible adjustment. This is when the books rest. He continues. Not sleep exactly, more like a pause in their telling. As if in agreement, a barely perceptible stillness spreads through the space below. The subtle hums you noticed earlier, those low vibrations from the shelves, fade into something even quieter. Not gone, just soften, like voices lowering out of courtesy. You shift slightly, and the blanket beside you responds at last, unfolding just enough to drape comfortably across your lap. It carries a gentle warmth, as though it remembers every previous evening it has spent in this exact spot. The wizard notices, though he doesn't look directly. It prefers to wait until it's certain, he murmurs. Certain of what is left unsaid, though the answer feels obvious in a quiet, unspoken way. Outside, the rain continues its patient descent. A few droplets gather at the top of the glass, hesitating before choosing their path downward, tracing slow, wandering lines that occasionally intersect and merge. The world beyond the window is indistinct, just soft shapes and muted lights. But there is something deeply comforting in that lack of clarity. Nothing demands your attention. Nothing asks to be understood. The lantern flickers once, then steadies. Its glow casts soft, overlapping shadows along the sloped ceiling, shapes that shift just enough to feel alive, but never enough to distract. The wizard reaches for a small object on the table, a thin, well-worn book no larger than his hand. He opens it, though you notice he does not look down. Instead, he turns a single page with quiet care. No sound comes from it. No visible text reveals itself from where you sit. And yet, something changes. Not in the room, but in the feeling of it. As though an extra layer of calm has been gently laid over everything. Some stories, he says softly, are best read without being heard. He closes the book again after a moment and returns it to the table. The shift lingers, settling into the spaces between each sound. The rain, the faint hum of the walls, the slow, steady rhythm of the lantern flame. Time continues to stretch in that same unhurried way. Minutes, or perhaps longer, pass without needing to be counted. Eventually, the wizard exhales a quiet breath and folds his hands loosely in his lap. "It's a good night," he says, almost to himself. And it is. Not because anything remarkable has happened, but because nothing needed to. The library holds its shape around you, steady and unchanging. The rain keeps its soft, endless rhythm. The warmth of the blanket, the quiet presence beside you, the gentle weight of the moment, all of it remains exactly as it should be. Your eyes may linger on the shifting paths of water along the glass, or on the steady glow of the lantern, or perhaps on nothing at all. There is no wrong place for your attention to rest. Below, far beyond sight, the shelves stand in quiet rows. The unfinished pages wait patiently on their table. The small glowing jar at the center of its curved room continues to pulse, collecting these very moments. This rain, this stillness, this quiet companionship, tucking them gently among all the others. The wizard does not move again. He simply sits, breathing slow and even, as much a part of the library now as the beams above or the stone beneath. And the library, in turn, seems to listen to the rain, to the night, and perhaps, in its own quiet way, to you. The hours drift softly onward, unmarked and unmeasured, until even the idea of time feels distant and unnecessary. There is only the steady hush of rain, the warm, golden dimness of the room, and the sense of being held within a place that asks nothing and offers everything in return. So you remain here, beneath the sloping roof, with the rain tracing its endless patterns across the glass, and the quiet magic of the wizard's library gently keeping watch, as the night deepens and carries you, slowly and peacefully, into rest. Tonight, we find ourselves beneath the softly glowing streets of an old lantern-lit town, following the gentle ticking of unseen gears to a hidden workshop where a Clockwork Toymaker spends the quiet hours crafting tiny marvels for sleeping children. Let us begin by stepping carefully down the narrow stone staircase tucked behind the baker's pantry, where the scent of cinnamon rolls still lingers warmly in the air, mingling with the faint metallic perfume of polished brass and machine oil below. The stairs curve downward in a slow spiral, their edges worn smooth by many years of quiet footsteps. Above us, somewhere beyond the bakery floorboards, the last customers of the evening gather scarves and parcels before wandering home through foggy streets. But down here, beneath the city's ordinary bustle, another world hums softly awake. At the bottom of the staircase hangs a tiny silver bell, no larger than a thimble. As the wooden door opens inward, The bell gives a delicate ting that somehow sounds less like metal and more like the polite greeting of a very small bird. The workshop glows amber in the firelight. Hundreds of clocks line the curved stone walls, each ticking at its own leisurely rhythm. None of them agree with one another. A tall walnut grandfather clock insists it is nearly midnight, while a cluster of tiny travel clocks above the bookshelf stubbornly argue for 7:30. Near the ceiling, a moon-shaped clock with silver hands has simply given up on numbers altogether and now displays only little painted pictures of owls. The Toymaker claims it is more accurate that way. His name is Oswin Belmere, though most of the town simply calls him Mr. Belmere, or occasionally, that peculiar fellow who buys too many springs. At the moment, he sits hunched gently atop a tall, wooden stool beside the hearth, polishing the brass ear of a clockwork rabbit no larger than a teacup. His spectacles rest low on the bridge of his nose, reflecting the warm light of the fire in two sleepy little crescents. The rabbit twitches suddenly. Oswin pauses. The rabbit sneezes. A tiny puff of silver dust bursts from its nose. "Well," he murmurs thoughtfully, "that's new." He makes a small note in the enormous ledger beside him under the category Unexpected Mechanical Behaviors. The list beneath it is already very long. A copper kettle bubbles softly over the fire nearby, sending fragrant curls of steam through the workshop. Tonight's tea appears to contain lavender, honey blossom, and something faintly minty that sparkles when the steam catches the light. The Toymaker insists the sparkling is entirely harmless, though he also insists this while wearing gloves specifically labeled Intimentie. The workshop itself feels less like a room and more like the inside of an old storybook. Wooden shelves stretch upward in every direction, crowded with marvelous little creations. Clockwork foxes nap in piles of velvet scraps. Tiny mechanical birds sleep, hanging upside down from brass perches, occasionally giving soft, sleepy chirps whenever the gears inside them settle. There are toy trains that run without tracks, dancing ballerinas powered by cinnamon, scented steam, and miniature dragons whose only magical ability appears to be warming socks. Those dragons are surprisingly popular during winter. Near the far wall, dozens of unfinished toys rest patiently beneath linen cloths. Small handwritten tags dangle from their wrists or wings. For Mira, age 6, likes thunderstorms. For Thomas, age 9, afraid of the dark but trying very hard about it. For Eleanor, age 4, has misplaced 3 teeth in 1 shoe. Oswin remembers every child. That, perhaps, is his greatest magic. He reaches now for another unfinished toy waiting carefully upon the workbench. This one is a little owl made from walnut wood and polished bronze. Its wings are delicate layers of overlapping metal feathers, each engraved with tiny, swirling patterns no larger than raindrops. The owl's eyes blink slowly as he lifts it, still awake. Oswin asks. The owl rotates its head all the way backward. "Reasonable answer," he says. From somewhere under the floorboards comes the muffled sound of humming. Not human humming, deeper, rhythmic. The workshop itself is alive with machinery hidden beneath the stone foundations of the city. Ancient gears turn far below, slowly powering ventilation fans, heating pipes, and the vast network of enchanted mechanisms that keep the workshop running smoothly through every season. Or mostly smoothly. A pipe suddenly whistles overhead with a dramatic squeal. The owl startles. A nearby Clockwork hedgehog rolls directly off a shelf. Oswin catches it without looking. "Good evening, Pipe 7. He sighs toward the ceiling, feeling theatrical again. The pipe continues screaming for several seconds, before settling into embarrassed silence. The Toymaker takes this as an apology. He climbs carefully from the stool and crosses the workshop toward a long worktable covered in blueprints. Sheets of parchment overlap one another in organized chaos, each filled with tiny sketches and handwritten measurements. Here are diagrams for folding wings, spring-loaded paws, musical mechanisms, rotating ears, blinking eyes, and one particularly ambitious sketch labeled Tentative Self, Butter Application Device. That project, sadly, has been delayed after an unfortunate marmalade incident. Oswin adjusts the lamp above the table, and golden light spills across the papers. Outside the round workshop windows, rain begins tapping gently against the glass. The sound mingles with the ticking clocks and bubbling kettle until the entire room feels wrapped in layers of soft rhythm. It is the sort of place where time forgets to hurry. The Toymaker likes it that way. He opens a small drawer filled with hundreds of carefully sorted gears. Tiny labels identify them in neat handwriting. Playful, reliable, over-enthusiastic, prone to singing. Oswin studies the compartments thoughtfully before selecting one particularly tiny brass gear from the stubborn but kind-hearted section. Perfect, he whispers. The owl watches closely as he installs the gear inside its chest with a pair of silver tweezers. There is a soft click, then another. The owl blinks twice. Its wings flutter gently, and finally, in a voice no louder than the rustle of paper, it says, "Rain tonight." Oswin smiles. "Yes," he says softly. "I believe so." The owl appears very pleased with itself. He places it carefully beside the fire to warm while he pours himself a cup of tea. The ceramic mug is chipped near the handle and painted with tiny stars faded from many years of use. As he settles into his chair again, the clocks continue their endless, uneven symphony around him. Tick, 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 tock. Where? Somewhere high above. One cuckoo clock politely coughs before announcing absolutely nothing. Oswin suspects it enjoys the attention. The rain deepens outside. Warm firelight flickers across shelves of brass and walnut. And beneath the sleeping town overhead, the hidden workshop continues its quiet work through the long and peaceful hours of the night. For there are still toys waiting to be finished before morning. And somewhere, beyond the rain-swept rooftops and foggy lantern streets, children sleep beneath heavy quilts, unaware that a patient old Toymaker is carefully building small companions meant to sit beside their beds, accompany them through lonely storms, or simply make them smile on difficult mornings. Oswin believes every child deserves at least one impossible thing, so he keeps working, slowly, carefully, listening all the while to the soothing heartbeat of clocks. The deeper the night grows, the quieter the city becomes above the workshop, until even the bakery overhead falls silent, and only the rain remains, whispering softly along the cobblestones like pages turning in a very old book. Oswin Belmere has always liked this hour best. There is a particular stillness that arrives after midnight in the hidden places of the world. A gentleness settles over everything then, as though even the buildings themselves grow sleepy. The clocks seem to tick more softly. The fire burns lower and warmer. Even the enchanted machinery beneath the floorboards settles into a slower rhythm, humming like some great metallic creature curled comfortably beneath a blanket. The Toymaker sips his tea and studies the shelves around him. Many of the toys are already asleep. That is not entirely a figure of speech. Near the window, 3 clockwork kittens have curled themselves into a neat brass pile atop a folded scarf. Tiny puffs of steam rise from their noses whenever they breathe. One of them twitches occasionally, perhaps dreaming of mechanical mice. Nearby, a toy submarine floating in a wash basin, gives a sleepy little honk every few minutes before drifting lazily in circles again. Oswin once tried to understand exactly why some toys developed personalities while others remained merely mechanical. After 37 years, he has concluded the answer is probably moonlight, or possibly cinnamon. Magic, unfortunately, can be frustratingly vague about these things. He sets his empty mug aside and rises from the chair with a quiet creak of knees and floorboards. The owl by the fire watches him carefully now, its bronze eyes gleaming softly in the hearth light. "Would you like your finishing polish?" Oswin asks. The owl nods once. "Thought so." He crosses toward a cabinet filled with tiny glass bottles. Each contains a different enchantment mixture, glowing faintly in shades of silver, amber, blue, and mossy green. Their handwritten labels sway gently as he searches among them. Patience, curiosity, excellent balance, moderate courage around ducks. That last one had become unexpectedly necessary after the Great Goose Market incident 3 winters ago. At last, Oswin retrieves a small bottle containing liquid gold light. He uncorks it carefully, and immediately the room fills with the faint scent of cedar wood and warm rain. "Ah!" He sighs contentedly. Fresh batch. Using an impossibly tiny brush, he paints delicate lines of enchantment along the owl's wings. The golden polish sinks into the engraved feathers like sunlight melting into water. As he works, the owl's mechanisms produce soft little clicks and whirs of satisfaction. "There we are," he murmurs. "Now then, perhaps a bedtime melody." The owl considers this, then it opens its beak. A tiny lullaby drifts into the workshop. It sounds like distant wind chimes mixed with falling snow and faraway bells heard through winter fog. Soft, wandering, peaceful enough to quiet even the clocks for a moment. Oswin closes his eyes as he listens, not because he is sleepy, though perhaps slightly sleepy, mostly because the melody reminds him of someone. Long ago, before the workshop belonged to him, another toymaker worked these same benches beneath the city. Old Master Alderwick, with his silver beard stained permanently with varnish and tea leaves, had taught Oswin everything he knew about clockwork enchantments. Well, the old master used to say, usually while upside down beneath some malfunctioning machine, "If a toy cannot comfort a frightened child at 2 a.m, what is the point of making it?" A perfectly reasonable philosophy, though Master Alderwick had also believed soup could cure nearly any magical catastrophe, which proved less reliable. The workshop creaks softly around Oswin as he wanders deeper between the crowded shelves. Here, in the furthest corner, beneath a hanging cluster of lantern crystals, sits his oldest worktable. The wood is darkened by decades of use, covered in tiny burn marks, scratches, ink stains, and mysterious dents whose origins have long been forgotten. One dent, however, is clearly dragon-shaped. A small sign hangs above the table, "Please, do not feed the prototypes." This instruction exists for excellent reasons. As if hearing the sign mentioned aloud, something rustles beneath the tablecloth nearby. Osling pauses. The rustling pauses too. Slowly, very slowly, a tiny brass dragon pokes its head out from beneath the fabric. Its eyes glow faintly blue. A screwdriver dangles guiltily from its mouth. Oswin raises an eyebrow. The dragon lowers the screwdriver. Another screwdriver clatters out from under the table. Then a spoon. Then, rather impressively, an entire teacup. "I wondered where that had gone," Oswin says mildly. The dragon sneezes a puff of harmless smoke. Its wings droop. "Oh, don't look so tragic," he chuckles softly. "Come here." The little creature climbs into his hands with the clinking delicacy of wind-up jewelry. Its brass scales feel pleasantly warm from hiding near the furnace pipes. Tiny gears shift beneath its belly as it settles comfortably into his palms. Unlike the sock warming dragons sold during winter markets, this particular prototype had been designed as a companion dragon for long journeys. Unfortunately, during testing, it became emotionally attached to kitchen utensils. No one fully understands why. Oswin scratches gently beneath its chin plate, and the dragon emits a sound somewhere between a kettle whistle and a cat purr. "There now," he says. "You may keep the spoon." The dragon looks deeply relieved. Together they cross the workshop toward the back corridor, where the hidden storage rooms lie beyond a heavy velvet curtain. The air grows cooler here, carrying the mineral scent of old stone and the faint sweetness of cedar chests. Most visitors never see this part of the workshop. Not that there are many visitors. Oswin prefers things quiet. The corridor walls are lined with old portraits of previous toymakers, each painted holding one of their creations. There is stern-faced Madame Briarthorn beside a mechanical fox. Gentle old Perrin Vale holding a toy whale suspended on invisible strings. Master Aldwick himself appears half asleep in his portrait, clutching an unfinished duck upside down. Some traditions deserve preservation. As Oswin walks past, several portraits nod politely. One snores faintly. At the very end of the corridor sits a narrow blue door, marked with a brass crescent moon. The dragon in his arms immediately hides its face beneath its wings. "Oh yes," Oswin whispers. "I know." He opens the door carefully. Inside is the Midnight Archive. Rows upon rows of shelves stretch upward into darkness, filled not with toys, but with dreams. Not literal dreams, exactly, or perhaps slightly literal. Glass jars line the shelves in countless shapes and sizes. Each glows faintly from within. Some contain swirling golden lights. Others flicker with drifting colors like underwater lanterns. Tiny handwritten labels adorn every lid. First snowfall, the feeling of falling asleep beside a fireplace. Remembering a song you haven't heard in years. Warm bread at dawn. Oswin moves quietly through the aisles, his slippers whispering against the stone floor. The archive is where he stores inspiration for his enchantments. Tiny captured fragments of comfort, wonder, and peaceful memory gathered carefully over many years. A single drop of dream, light added to a toy, can transform it from clever machinery into something deeply cherished. The dragon peers nervously around the room. One jar nearby emits the distant sound of ocean waves. Another smells faintly of pine forests after rain. Far overhead, floating lanterns drift lazily through the darkness like sleepy jellyfish. Oswin stops before a shelf near the center of the archive and studies the labels thoughtfully. At last, he selects a very small jar no larger than a walnut. Inside swirls a pale silver glow. Its label reads, "The safe feeling of hearing rain from bed." Perfect, he whispers, and together, beneath the sleeping city, the old Toymaker and his tiny spoon, loving dragon carry the glowing dream, light back toward the warmth of the workshop, where more gentle creations still wait patiently to be brought to life. By the time the clocks begin murmuring toward the earliest hours before dawn, the rain above the city has softened into a fine silver mist, and the hidden workshop glows with the deep, honey-colored warmth of a place that has remained awake all night for something quietly important. Oswin Belmare returns from the Midnight Archive, carrying the tiny jar of dream, light as carefully as though it contains a sleeping firefly, which, in fairness, it resembles rather closely. The brass dragon rides on his shoulder now, clutching its beloved spoon like a knight carrying a ceremonial sword. Every so often it peers into the glowing jar and gives a respectful little chirp, as if acknowledging particularly fine craftsmanship. Indeed, Oswin whispers back, very high quality rain ambience. The dragon nods solemnly. Back in the main workshop, the clocks continue their endless conversations with one another. The moon-shaped clock has drifted into displaying paintings of sleepy badgers now, which usually means it believes dawn is approaching. The grandfather clock disagrees entirely and has entered one of its occasional sulking silences. Oswin removes his spectacles to polish them with a linen cloth. At his workbench, the walnut owl waits patiently beside the fire, where its polished wings gleam like bronze leaves in autumn light. It blinks once as he approaches. Nearly finished, he assures it. The owl appears pleased by this development. Carefully, Oswin uncorks the tiny jar from the archive. Immediately, the scent of rainfall fills the air. Not ordinary rain, safe rain. The kind heard from beneath heavy blankets while a lamp glows softly nearby. Rain against distant windows. Rain accompanied by warmth, tea, and nowhere at all one needs to be. The entire workshop seems to sigh gently. Even the machinery beneath the floor slows its humming for a moment, listening. Using a thin silver instrument shaped like a tuning fork, Oswin lifts a thread of silver dream light from the jar. It stretches delicately through the air like glowing silk. Slowly, carefully, he guides it toward the owl's chest, where the tiny brass gears turn quietly beneath carved walnut feathers. The moment the dream light touches the mechanism, the owl exhales, not steam, not music, a feeling. A soft wave of calm drifts through the room like warm air from an opened oven on winter mornings. The clocks tick more gently. The fire crackles lower. Somewhere on the shelf, one of the sleeping Clockwork kittens rolls over happily in its dreams. The owl blinks twice. Then it softly says, "Home." Oswin smiles.
Yes,
he whispers. Exactly right. For a long moment, the workshop remains very still. These are his favorite moments. Not the building itself, not the wending of gears or carving of wood or polishing of brass, though he loves those things dearly. No. His favorite moment is always this one, the instant a toy becomes more than the sum of its parts. The moment it awakens into comfort, into companionship, into something capable of quietly standing guard beside a child through thunderstorms or lonely nights or difficult dreams. The brass dragon sneezes a tiny puff of smoke directly into Oswin's hair. The spell promptly ends. Well, the Toymaker sighs, patting out a smoldering curl. There's the atmosphere ruined. The dragon looks apologetic. Very convincing remorse. He reaches for his tea only to discover the cup empty. A tragedy of modest but undeniable significance. Fortunately, the kettle still simmers softly near the hearth. As Oswin prepares another cup, the workshop gradually stirs around him. A tiny mechanical robin hidden among the rafters begins practicing hesitant morning chirps. One shelf over, the toy submarine bumps sleepily against the wash basin with little watery clunks. The sock-warming dragons have formed a small, tangled pile around a heating vent, all snoring faintly through their noses. The city above remains asleep, but not for much longer. Soon the bakers overhead will arrive to knead dough by lantern light. Milk carts will rattle through foggy streets. Chimneys will wake one by one across the rooftops. And before that happens, the deliveries must be prepared. Oswin moves toward a large oak cabinet beside the staircase. Inside are dozens of carefully wrapped parcels, tied with velvet ribbon and labeled in his neat handwriting. Some are destined for shop windows. Others will appear quietly upon bedside tables, left by parents who discovered the workshop through whispered recommendations and very discreet directions. A few deliveries, however, remain unexplained even to Oswin himself. Every now and then, an address simply appears overnight in the order ledger. No payment enclosed, no signature, only the name of a child who seems, somehow, to need something gentle. Oswin stopped questioning this many years ago. Magic, again, enjoys its mysteries. He places the owl carefully into a cushioned wooden box lined with blue velvet. The brass dragon leans over the edge to inspect the packaging with grave seriousness. "No, you may not include the spoon," Oswin informs it. The dragon slumps dramatically. "You still have the other spoon." This seems acceptable. As he ties the ribbon closed, the owl softly hums its lullaby from inside the box. The melody drifts upward through the workshop like warm candlelight. Outside the round windows, the misty darkness begins slowly turning pearl grey. Dawn approaches. Oswin crosses the room to extinguish several lanterns no longer needed. One by one, their magical flames dim into glowing embers. Shadows soften across the shelves. The workshop grows quieter now, settling toward its daytime rest. The Toymaker himself feels pleasantly tired, not exhausted, satisfied. There is a difference. He pauses beside the old portraits lining the corridor. In the faint early light, the painted faces seem gentler somehow. Master Alderwick still dozes with his upside, down duck. Madame Briarthorn's mechanical fox appears to be smirking at something only it can hear. "Well," Oswin says softly to them all, "another successful evening, I think." One portrait gives a sleepy thumbs up. Further down the corridor, a floorboard creaks. Then another, tiny footsteps. From beneath the velvet curtain emerges a very small clockwork mouse, carrying an enormous inventory scroll twice its own size. The mouse squeaks importantly. Oswin accepts the scroll with practiced calm. "Ah," he says after glancing at the first line. "We're out of silver springs again." The mouse nods gravely. "And cinnamon polish." Another solemn nod. "And, remarkably, 12 teaspoons." At this, both Oswin and the mouse slowly turn to look at the brass dragon. The dragon attempts innocence. Unfortunately, innocence is difficult to maintain while sitting atop a visible mountain of stolen cutlery. "I see," Oswin says. The dragon offers him one spoon back as a peace gesture. For a moment, the old Toymaker tries very hard to remain dignified. Then he laughs, a warm, tired laugh that fills the quiet workshop and mingles with the ticking clocks and fading rain beyond the windows. The kind of laugh that belongs only to safe places in the middle of long nights. And as the first pale light of morning reaches the hidden windows beneath the city streets, the workshop slowly settles to sleep at last. The fire burns low. The clocks continue their endless gentle ticking. Tiny mechanical creatures curl together beneath blankets of velvet and wool scraps. And Oswin Belmere, master Toymaker of the hidden workshop below the lantern streets, finishes his final cup of tea beside the hearth while dawn arrives softly overhead. Somewhere far above, children will soon awaken to discover curious little parcels waiting beside their beds. Small, impossible things, made carefully, made kindly, made through the peaceful hours of the night by an old Toymaker who believes comfort itself is a kind of magic. And now, as the workshop grows warm and quiet, and the last lantern dims beside the fire, the gentle ticking of 100 sleepy clocks carries us softly toward rest. Tonight, we find ourselves climbing a rain-swept mountain road toward an ancient inn, where weary travelers warm their hands beside the hearth of a retired dragon slayer who now spends his evenings serving cinnamon stew and polishing old armor that no longer needs to fight anything at all. Let us begin. Beneath the steady glow of lanterns swinging gently from iron posts along the cliffside path, their amber light reflecting in puddles left behind by the evening rain. The mountain air is cool and fragrant with pine resin, wet stone, and wood smoke drifting from somewhere higher up the slope. Far below, hidden beneath layers of mist, tiny village lights shimmer like fallen stars scattered across the valley floor. The road curves slowly upward. Your boots crunch softly against damp gravel. And somewhere ahead, carried faintly on the wind, comes the comforting sound of laughter mingling with clinking mugs and crackling firewood. The inn is close. At last, through the drifting mountain fog, the building appears. The Hearthworm Inn sits perched against the cliffs like a stubborn old cat, refusing to leave its favorite chair. Its stone walls are thick and weathered, threaded with ivy that glows faintly silver beneath the moonlight. Golden windows shine warmly against the dark mountainside, and from the great chimney rises a ribbon of smoke scented with cedar wood and roasting herbs. Above the entrance hangs an enormous wooden sign, carved in the shape of a sleeping dragon curled around a soup pot. One of the painted eyes occasionally winks. The locals insist this is enchantment. The innkeeper insists the sign simply enjoys attention. Both explanations seem equally likely. As you step beneath the awning, rainwater drips gently from your cloak, while the heavy oak door swings inward with a welcoming creak. Warmth immediately surrounds you. The heat from the hearth rolls through the inn in soft waves, scented with mulled cider, baked onions, and burning pine logs. After the cool mountain air outside, the atmosphere feels almost dreamlike. Your fingers begin thawing at once. The common room glows in shades of gold and amber. Massive ceiling beams cross overhead, blackened by centuries of smoke. Bundles of drying herbs hang from hooks beside copper lanterns that hum faintly with contained fire magic. Long wooden tables stretch across the room, worn smooth by generations of travelers, resting their elbows, mugs, maps, and occasionally unconscious companions upon them. At the center of it all burns the hearth. It is enormous. Large enough, in fact, that an entire ox could theoretically roast inside it, though tonight the fire simply crackles peacefully around thick cedar logs. The stone mantel above displays a peculiar collection of objects, dragon teeth polished into candle holders, old maps curled at the edges, chipped helmets, tiny carved figurines, and at least 4 teapots that appear to have survived small explosions. A black iron kettle hangs over the flames, bubbling steadily. Whatever is inside smells deeply comforting. Probably stew. Possibly magic. Hopefully both. Behind the bar stands the owner himself. Bramwell Thorn is precisely what one might expect a retired dragon slayer to become after deciding he is entirely finished with dangerous adventures forever. Broad-shouldered and silver hair, he moves with the slow confidence of a man who has wrestled creatures larger than cottages and now considers soup preparation a far more reasonable use of time. A faded scar crosses one cheek. Another disappears beneath his collar. But tonight he wears a flower, dusted apron embroidered with the words, "Now Stowards ne artai pastories." Experience has clearly shaped this policy. Bramwell looks up as you enter. "Well then," he says, in a voice warm as the hearth itself, "you look properly rained upon." You nod. "Excellent," he replies. "Means the mountain hasn't blown you away yet. Come warm yourself before the stew develops opinions." This, apparently, is considered hospitality here. You settle gratefully into a cushioned chair near the fire, while Bramwell ladles steaming stew into a thick, ceramic bowl the size of a helmet. Nearby, several travelers lounge in various states of exhaustion and contentment. A merchant snores quietly beneath a mountain of knitted blankets. Two librarians from the southern coast whisper heatedly over a card game involving tiny, enchanted beetles. Near the window, a traveling musician tunes a harp whose strings glow faintly blue whenever touched. And in the far corner sits a woman carefully mending dragon scale gloves while sipping tea from a mug shaped like a bear. No one seems hurried. The storm outside has made travelers of everyone tonight. Bramwell sets the stew before you with a thick slice of buttered bread balanced precariously on the rim. Steam curls upward carrying the scent of rosemary, roasted garlic, mushrooms, and something rich and peppery beneath it all. House special, he says proudly. Mountain root stew. You glance into the bowl. Something inside the broth glimmers briefly. Bramwell notices. Don't worry, he says. Only mild enchantment. There is a pause. Probably. Then, with the calm satisfaction of someone who has caused precisely the amount of concern he intended, he returns to polishing mugs behind the bar. The stew is wonderful. Warmth spreads slowly through you with every spoonful. Tiny flecks of golden herb drift lazily through the broth like edible starlight. The bread crackles softly at the crust before giving way to buttery warmth inside. Outside, wind brushes against the windows. Inside, the inn hums with quiet life. A grandfather clock ticks steadily beside the staircase leading upstairs. Somewhere in the kitchen, pans clatter rhythmically while someone hums an old mountain lullaby. Firelight dances across polished wood beams and sleepy faces alike. And above it all hangs the peculiar comfort unique to roadside inns during storms. The feeling that, for tonight at least, there is nowhere else in the world you are required to be. Bramwell eventually returns carrying a small iron tray topped with mugs of cider. Without asking, he places one beside you. The cider smells of apples, cinnamon, cloves, and a faint trace of smoke from the hearth. Tiny sparks drift lazily across its surface before vanishing. Dragon pepper, Bramwell explains. Clears mountain chill right out of the bones. You take a cautious sip. Warmth immediately travels all the way to your fingertips. You also briefly suspect you can hear colors. Bramwell nods approvingly. Good batch tonight. He lowers himself carefully into the enormous armchair opposite yours with a soft grunt of someone whose knees have spent many years objecting to weather changes. For a few moments, neither of you speaks. The fire crackles. Rain taps gently against the windows. The inn settles deeper into evening comfort. Then your eyes drift toward the massive sword hanging above the hearth. Its blade is enormous, nearly as tall as Bramwell himself, though age has dimmed its once brilliant silver sheen. Strange runes curl along the metal, glowing faintly whenever the firelight shifts. One section near the hilt appears slightly melted, as though something with extremely strong opinions about swords once breathed on it. Bramwell notices you looking. "Aye," he says. "Old Emberwake." The name settles warmly into the room. He leans back in his chair, staring thoughtfully at the sword overhead. "Terrible weapon for traveling," he remarks. "Far too heavy. Could never find decent places to store it either. Once accidentally knocked over an apothecary, just turning around." The nearby merchant, still half asleep beneath blankets, murmurs, "Wasn't accidental." Bramwell ignores this entirely. Still, he continues, "Did its job well enough." You glance toward the dragon, shaped sign swaying gently outside the fogged windows. "Retired?" you ask softly. Bramwell smiles into the fire.
"Oh yes,"
he says. The dragons and I came to a mutual agreement years ago. The fire pops gently. What agreement was that? He reaches for his cider. That everyone involved preferred soup. The common room grows softer as the evening deepens, the kind of softness that belongs only to mountain inns during rainstorms, when every traveler begins unconsciously settling closer to the hearth, and even the shadows seem warm around the edges. Bramwell Thorn sips thoughtfully from his cider, while the fire paints slow amber light across the old scars on his hands. Outside, mist curls along the windows in pale ribbons. Inside, the hearthworm inbreathes and creaks, gently around its guests like a great wooden ship at anchor for the night. Bramwell says at last, people always imagine dragon slayers spend their lives doing dramatic things. He gestures vaguely with his mouth, standing on cliffs, shouting at storms, looking terribly heroic while covered in ash. The merchant beneath the blankets snorts awake, just long enough to mumble, "You did shout at storms." "Only because storms are rude," Bramwell replies calmly. This appears to settle the matter. The innkeeper rises slowly from his chair and crosses toward the massive hearth. Hanging beside the mantel is a long iron poker polished smooth from years of use. He adjusts one of the cedar logs with practiced ease, and a burst of sparks spirals lazily upward through the chimney. The warmth rolls outward in comforting waves. Several guests sigh contentedly, almost in unison. Bramwell glances over his shoulder. You'd be surprised how similar dragon keeping and innkeeping actually are. "Dragon keeping?" asks one of the librarians from behind a stack of enchanted beetle cards. "Oh, certainly," Bramwell says. Most mountain dragons are basically oversized house cats with stronger opinions about territory. The musician near the window plucks a soft, questioning note on the harp. Bramwell points the poker toward him. "You laugh, but I once knew a frost dragon who refused to sleep unless someone polished his treasure hoard twice a week." "Why?" "Liked the sparkle." The entire inn grows thoughtfully quiet. Then the woman mending dragon scale gloves nods once and says, "That sounds accurate." Apparently no further explanation is needed. Bramwell settles back beside the hearth and opens a small cast iron door built into the stonework near the fire. From inside, a wave of buttery warmth escapes into the room, along with the scent of cinnamon and baked apples. A collective murmur rises from the guests. Bramwell says with satisfaction. The hearth bun survived. This is evidently not guaranteed. He withdraws a tray of golden pastries, glazed with honey and scattered with tiny sugar crystals that shimmer faintly blue in the firelight. "Careful," he warns while setting them atop the bar. Still enchanted, the merchant peeks out from beneath the blankets. In what way? Bramwell thinks about this. Mostly optimism. No one seems entirely certain what this means, but everyone accepts a pastry anyway. The bun in your hands is wonderfully warm, its crust delicate and crisp, while the center remains soft enough to melt apart with barely any effort at all. Sweet cinnamon steam rises into the air as you break it open. For one fleeting moment, you feel profoundly convinced that tomorrow will probably work itself out. Strong magic indeed. Near the staircase, the grandfather clock chimes softly. Not loudly. This is an inn clock. It understands people are resting. Several guests begin drifting toward their rooms upstairs. Chairs scrape gently against floorboards. Cloaks are gathered. Final mugs of cider disappear into sleepy hands. The storm outside has faded to a quiet drizzle now, and occasionally the fog parts just enough to reveal distant moonlight silvering the mountain cliffs beyond the windows. The musician continues playing softly near the fire. The melody drifts lazily through the room like smoke curling upward into dark rafters. Gentle harp notes mingle with rainwater tapping the glass and the quiet bubbling of stew still simmering in the kitchen. Bramwell begins wiping down the bar with slow, practiced movements. The sort of rhythm learned over many years. Not rushed, never hurried, just steady, comfortable. You notice now that dozens of peculiar objects hang from the ceiling beams overhead. Small charms crafted from dragon scales and polished stone. Tiny glass bottles filled with glowing embers. Wind chimes made from silver claws no larger than sewing needles. One object in particular catches your attention. A lantern, or something very close to one. Its frame appears to be crafted from dark copper, shaped into curling wings, while inside floats not flame, but a tiny drifting cloud of golden smoke. The lantern hums softly to itself, casting warm, rippling light across the room. Bramwell notices your gaze. "Oh," he says, glancing upward. "That was a gift. From a dragon. From a dragon dentist." There is a pause. You wait. Bramwell continues polishing mugs. Eventually, he sighs. "Turns out dragons get toothaches just like anything else," he explains, only louder. The librarian nearest the hearth winces sympathetically. "Can't imagine the appointments. 3-hour cleanings," Bramwell says darkly, "and they hate mint." The merchant beneath the blankets mutters, "Reasonable." Outside, wind brushes softly against the inn walls. The mountain itself seems half asleep now, far below the cliffs. Tiny lanterns drift through the valley roads where late travelers make their careful way home through the mist. Somewhere distant, an owl calls once across the dark forest. Inside the Hearthworm Inn, however, everything remains warm and golden. Bramwell eventually disappears through the kitchen doorway before returning moments later, carrying an enormous pot of fresh tea. The scent arrives before he does. Chamomile, mountain herbs, and something faintly sweet like vanilla being warmed beside a fire. "Night tea," he announces. This statement alone somehow lowers the volume of the entire room. Even the enchanted beetles on the librarian's card table stop glowing quite so enthusiastically. The innkeeper pours steaming cups for the remaining guests, while the harp music continues softly nearby. When he reaches your table, he pauses briefly. "Storm will clear by morning," he says. "Roads should be safe enough after sunrise." You nod, though part of you suspects no one here is especially eager to leave just yet. Bramwell smiles knowingly. "Happens often," he says quietly. "People come here thinking they're only stopping for shelter." He glances around the room, at the warm fire, the sleepy travelers, the drifting lantern light, the quiet music. Then the mountain convinces them to rest properly for once. For a while after that, conversation fades almost entirely. The inn settles into peaceful silence broken only by soft ordinary sounds, the turning of book pages, the crackle of logs, quiet sipping of tea, the occasional sleepy murmur from someone nearly dozing in their chair. Bramwell himself finally lowers into the armchair beside the fire again with a tired exhale. The great sword emberwake gleams faintly overhead. But here, in this warm room filled with bread and rain and soft lantern light, it no longer feels like a weapon, only a memory, a relic from a louder life. The retired dragon slayer stares into the flames for a long moment before speaking again, his voice quieter now. "You know the funny thing?" "What's that?" He smiles faintly. "I spent half my life thinking peace was something you earned after enough fighting." The fire crackles softly between you. But it turns out, Bramwell says, wrapping both hands around his teacup, peace is mostly just warm rooms, kind company, and remembering to keep the soup from burning. And somehow, listening to the storm finally fading beyond the mountain windows, while the old inn glows around you like a lantern against the dark, the answer feels entirely true. Long after midnight settles across the mountain roads, the Hearthworm Inn grows wonderfully quiet, wrapped in the deep stillness that arrives only when storms have passed, and every traveler has finally surrendered to warmth and exhaustion. The fire burns lower now, not dim, just softer. The cedar logs collapse inward occasionally with gentle sighs of sparks, sending ribbons of amber light across the sleeping common room. Shadows sway lazily along the ceiling beams where enchanted lanterns continue their slow humming glow. Most of the guests have drifted upstairs. The librarians fell asleep in their chairs, sometime around the third pot of tea, their enchanted beetles tucked neatly into a sugar bowl for the night. The merchant remains cocooned beneath knitted blankets near the hearth, snoring faintly in a rhythm oddly similar to distant thunder. Only the harpist still lingers awake by the window. Very softly, almost absent-mindedly, they pluck slow, wandering melodies while moonlight begins to break through the fog beyond the glass. The mountains outside shine silver now. Rainwater glitters along the cliffs, and high above the inn, stars gradually emerge one by one through thinning clouds. Bramwell Thorn moves quietly through the common room, extinguishing lanterns until only a few remain glowing near the hearth and staircase. In the softer light, the old inn feels even cozier somehow, as though the building itself has wrapped a blanket around its shoulders. The retired dragon, Slayer, pauses beside the enormous hearth. From a hook near the mantel, he retrieves a black iron kettle and refills it from a copper water barrel in the corner. Every movement is slow and practiced, familiar, the rhythm of someone who has performed these same quiet rituals for many years and no longer needs to think about them. Water sloshes gently, the fire crackles. Somewhere upstairs, old floorboards creak sleepily. Bramwell hangs the kettle once more over the glowing embers. "Can't let the hearth go thirsty overnight," he murmurs. This appears to be a perfectly serious concern. He notices you still awake and gestures toward the narrow staircase near the back wall. "Before you turn in," he says, "there's something most travelers miss." Curiosity stirs gently. Bramwell takes one of the remaining lanterns from its hook and motions for you to follow. The lantern light sways warmly as you climb the staircase behind him. The steps groan softly beneath heavy boots polished smooth by generations of passing feet. Along the walls hang old framed maps, faded mountain sketches, and curious paintings of dragons engaged in surprisingly ordinary activities. One dragon appears to be gardening. Another is knitting. A third looks deeply offended while attempting to fit inside a bathtub clearly designed for humans. "Commissioned those myself," Bramwell says proudly, important for realism. At the top of the stairs stretches a narrow hallway lined with guest rooms. Most doors remain closed now, warm light glowing faintly beneath a few of them. Somewhere distant, someone gives a sleepy cough before settling back into silence. But Bramwell continues past the rooms entirely. At the very end of the hall waits a small round door reinforced with iron bands, darkened by age and smoke. The innkeeper unlocks it with a heavy brass key. Warm night air immediately drifts inward. Beyond lies the rooftop terrace. The space opens unexpectedly onto the mountainside itself, sheltered partially by the towering stone chimney of the inn. Moss Covered flagstones stretch beneath hanging lanterns, while thick wool blankets rest folded atop wooden benches overlooking the valley below. The view is breathtaking. Far beneath the cliffs, scattered villages glow softly in the darkness, like tiny constellations fallen among the hills. Rivers gleam silver beneath the moonlight. Forests ripple black and endless across the valleys, their treetops swaying gently in the cooling wind. Above it all spreads the vast night sky, clear now after the storm, endless stars. Bramwell settles carefully onto one of the benches with the satisfied sigh of a man whose knees are once again negotiating with mountain weather. For a while, neither of you speaks. There is no need. The silence here feels companionable, peaceful. Only the distant rush of waterfalls and the occasional whisper of wind through pine trees drift upward from the valley below. At last, Bramwell gestures toward several enormous scratches carved into the cliffside rocks beyond the terrace. Dragon landing marks, he says casually. You glance sideways. Here. Oh yes, used to get visitors fairly often. He folds his arms comfortably. Mostly during winter. Why winter? A Bramwell looks mildly surprised, you need to ask. Hearth's enormous. This apparently explains everything. After a moment, he adds, dragons adore warm chimneys, especially older ones. Good for the scales. You picture enormous ancient creatures lounging around the inn like oversized cats seeking sunny windowsills. Oddly enough, it feels believable. One winter, Bramwell continues, had 3 snow dragons sleeping on the roof simultaneously. That sounds dangerous. Roof collapsed slightly. He pauses thoughtfully. Also impossible to remove them once comfortable. The harp music downstairs drifts faintly upward through the chimney now, soft as distant dreaming. Bramwell closes his eyes briefly while listening. You know, he says quietly, people always ask if I miss it. The dragon slaying. The wind brushes gently across the terrace, carrying the scent of pine forests and fading rain. Bramwell smiles faintly into the night. Truth is, adventure's overrated. He nods toward the warm golden windows below, where the inn glows against the mountainside. Most heroes eventually discover they were searching for someplace peaceful to sit down all alone. The words settle softly into the cool mountain air. Far below, a late traveler's lantern winds slowly along the distant road like a wandering firefly. The old innkeeper watches it for a moment before standing carefully once more. Come along, he says gently. Still have one final tradition before sleep. Back downstairs, the common room has grown nearly silent. The harpist has finally retired. Only embers glow within the hearth now, casting slow reddish light across sleeping chairs and polished wood beams overhead. Bramwell crosses toward the enormous sword mounted above the mantel. Emberwake. In the quiet firelight, the old blade seems almost peaceful itself. The innkeeper reaches up and taps 2 fingers lightly against the melted section near the hilt. For a brief moment, the runes along the sword shimmer faintly gold. Then, deep beneath the inn, something answers. A low rumbling vibration travels gently through the floorboards. Not threatening, not frightening. Content. Warm. Like the distant purr of some impossibly large creature asleep beneath the mountain. Bramwell smiles. Good night to you too. He murmurs toward the floor. You stare. The innkeeper notices. Oh, he says mildly. Did I never mention the cellar dragon? There is a pause. The what? Retired fellow. Old mountain drake named Brindle. A Bramwell begins stacking empty mugs, as though discussing entirely ordinary matters. Lives beneath the foundations. Keeps the pipes warm during winter. very fond of apricot jam. Another soft rumble vibrates pleasantly through the inn floorboards. Some dust drifts lazily from the rafters overhead. Bramwell nods downward approvingly. Yes, yes, I know. We're nearly out. And somehow, here in the warm, fading glow of the Hearthworm Inn, with ancient dragons beneath the cellar, soft embers in the hearth, and moonlight silvering the mountain beyond the windows, the world feels wonderfully gentle, safe, sleepy, and far away from anything sharp or hurried. At last Bramwell dims the final lantern beside the fire. Darkness settles softly around the room, touched only by the faint red glow of embers and the distant shimmer of stars beyond the glass. Rest well, the old dragon Slayer says quietly as the inn settles around you with one final sleepy creak. Then the mountains grow still. The hearth sighs softly into embers, and somewhere deep beneath the inn, the cellar dragon rumbles contentedly to sleep beside warm pipes and dreams of apricot jam. And that, my dear friends, is where we will end tonight's story. Good night.
you.